Welcome to Maddie's Monthly Foster Connection, a monthly webcast where we learn about topics of interest to those of us who are interested in starting and expanding foster programs. Our guest today is Zan Lowell. Zan Lowell got their start in animal welfare as a volunteer with Austin Pets Alive in 2013, where they quickly discovered a passion for dog behavior and training. They joined APA's dog behavior team as an intern in 2014, and in 2017, they became a full-time behavior trainer, supporting both dogs on-site at the shelter and with transitioning into their new homes. At the end of 2019, Zan transitioned to APA's dog behavior follow-up team, where they spent the next 5 years helping build APA's resource library and directly supporting thousands of adopters and fosters with the dogs and sometimes cats in their care. In recent years, they have developed a particular interest in the neuroscience of dog behavior and a trauma-informed approach to addressing behavioral challenges, especially among rescued and rehomed animals. They currently live in Richmond with their medical alum cat and behavior alum and playgroup success story, Pity Mix. Welcome, Zan.
Hello, and thank you for having me. That's the Pity Mix in question. Her name is Sojo, and she is very much a success story. So I am here obviously to talk about a holistic approach to foster behavior support. And there's kind of three roles that loosely fall into what that holistic approach takes: detective, educator, and mediator. I'm going to talk about what that means and how those all work together. The first thing we have to do, though, is make sure we are framing or sometimes reframing our approach when people come to us with behavior concerns about their foster animals. And this often falls to asking effective questions. Most of the time, fosters are going to come to you and ask, how do I stop this behavior? How do I fix this behavior? And the trick is, it's actually not that question. We have to ask why first. And the reason we ask why is that it allows us to provide a more effective support and guidance strategy, often, not always, but often with less trial and error. If we have a better understanding of why an animal is most likely doing something, we can tailor the approach more effectively for that animal. And the other reason we want to understand why is that it opens the door for the education and mediation piece. We are able to help reframe quote unquote bad behaviors as needs the animal has or as gaps in communication with the animal, which in the thousands of animals and fosters and adopters I've worked with, it often comes down to the animal has a need that's not being met and or there's a communication gap. So the why is an animal doing something? And I put an asterisk here and call it the most likely why, because we aren't in the animal's head, right? We can't be in their heads. All we can do is gather as much objective information as possible and assess to the best of our ability. Sometimes there's going to be trial and error in that, especially if you don't have a lot of experience yet, but that's okay. That's part of the journey, is both providing the support and on the other end, receiving the support too. They are individuals, as we always say. So the why falls into kind of two broad categories. One is your Occam's razor why. This is obviously like a puppy being a puppy. This is a dog who has just come in the home and has never lived in a home before. Cat who has never had to use a litter box before and needs litter box training, right? So your stage and age appropriate behaviors. These are the ones that are going to tend to be more straightforward. Doesn't mean we don't approach it with compassion and understanding, of course. But it tends to be more straightforward and like, here's a guide on litter training your cat. Here's a guide on potty training your puppy, directing your puppy's malleolence, all that sort of stuff. And the other one that tends to fall in this kind of more obvious, straightforward understanding of why an animal is doing something is the obvious provocation. Now, what obvious provocation is going to mean will vary. Everybody's got their opinion on what is obvious and what's not. I say consider whatever you think is obvious and assume it's not, because we are much more exposed to much wider variety of animals and a wider variety of behaviors just by the nature of the work we do. But I think probably one example we can all agree on is somebody sticking their hand into a dog's food bowl, dog growls, no other signs of like aggression or guarding or anything. So we just like, hey, leave the dog alone. Let's leave the dog alone while they're eating. For that, something that straightforward tends to resolve it. But we're going to focus on the things that aren't obvious. So how do we get to the root of the problem when it's not one of these more obvious common issues? So why else can it occur? Again, a lot of it comes down to the animal is trying to communicate something. We've got to figure that out. Or the human is not effectively communicating with the animal, with expectations, boundaries, all that stuff. and or the animal is trying to meet a need. So this can be a physical need, an emotional need, an instinctual need, social need, so on. Need is a pretty broad umbrella because it's not just about need in the sense of survival, it's about need in the sense of living and thriving and what an animal needs to do that. So a lot of this comes down to strategic questioning. To figure out the why, we have to ask who, what, when, and where. The handout that was sent in the chat, and I think will be posted on the forum as well, that goes into this a little more in depth. I'm going to do more broad strokes for the purpose of this presentation, but that handout provides a little more of an in-depth look for potty training issues, separation behaviors, and aggression with an asterisk mark, because a lot of people come for your help with aggression, and it's not always ends up being aggression. It's just either there's a misinterpretation or they just don't have the language to effectively describe the behavior. So it's aggression asterisk. Even those breakdowns are not going to be comprehensive, but it is much more detailed, and I hope will provide a good jumping off point for folks. So when we do this questioning process, where the detective process essentially is, we start by looking for surface clues. We're not going to start off digging deep if we don't have a clue pointing us in a specific direction. And the reason for that is because digging deep can become very time consuming very, very quickly. So what we need to do is look for the surface clues, things that kind of stand out, like who is in the room. We don't have to start like asking about like what's everybody's specific relationship like with the animal. Figure out who's in the room, and that applies to animals and people. What did the behavior look like? When did this happen? What happened when you got home? We don't necessarily have to go right away into figuring out, well, what happened when you got home. Let's make sure there's nothing else that's sticking out to us. And you're going to let the answers and new information you gather direct follow-up questions. You're going to look for those things where it's like something, something in the matrix has changed, essentially. Something sticks out of, oh, this happened in a narrow space that the dog growled. Well, that's probably something worth looking into, right? It happened around meal times. That might be poignant. That might be something that catches our attention and stands out on the surface from the other questions we're asking. Like, okay, well, that seems the most poignant piece that we've gotten on the surface. Let's dig there first. You're more likely than not going to have times that you're going to double back to dig deeper on previous lines of inquiry if you can't find enough surface clues. And again, sometimes that's just the tough reality. The fact is that this work is not simple and straightforward. The more complex the behavior, the more more detective work you have to do. But it's important to always reevaluate old data when you get new data. And the reason for that is that whether it's multiple people on your team or you just have too many animals that you can't retain all the information, we want to make sure we're keeping our notes, and that if something comes up a week, a month later, we're comparing, because sometimes that will cause a detail to stick out that maybe didn't stick out before. It's like, oh, both of these events happened around the same time of day, different locations, different people in the room, but it was both the same time of day. Maybe that's something we need to look into a little more. So the devil is, of course, in the details. And here are just some general tips for when you're doing that detective work. Descriptive details, so important. We want descriptive details, and when I say descriptive, I mean tell us about the body language. Don't tell us that animal's scared. Tell us what that fear looks like. Don't tell us the animal's aggressive. Tell us what that aggression looks like. Excitement, any of these things. And it's because emotion is different animals exhibit emotion differently. And knowing how that particular animal is exhibiting the emotion in that moment can help inform how we address it. If I have two cases, one of fearful dogs, one is I'm hiding constantly, and the other is I'm barking and growling at everybody constantly, there's going to be some overlap in how I help that dog overcome their fear, but there's also going to be big differences. One of those dogs needs to learn, we're not going to eat you, so it's safe to come out. And one of them maybe needs to learn, hey, if you're overwhelmed, go away. Maybe you need to create some space, learn from the other dog. So those details on what specifically their emotions are looking like. And again, sometimes it's about the person's misinterpreting that body language. If you've ever seen a submissive grin, I don't know if y'all remember the first time you saw a submissive grin from a dog, definitely weirded me out because I'd never seen a dog show teeth. That wasn't in some way a warning until that moment. And so it's a matter of you don't know, you don't till you know. We also want to make sure we're dissecting those one-word answers, the aggressive, stubborn, willful, dominant, submissive, anything like that, excited, especially the ones that carry the more weight, like aggressive, like dominant. And that's because people are going to have this kind of locked in their heads. And that ties into the education piece. If we can dissect what body language is actually going on, what actions the animal is actually doing, we can then use that to help steer the foster towards a better understanding of animal body language, animal communication, which is not only going to help with the animal currently in their care, but it'll also help for future animals that take into foster. So it's very much not a one and done thing when you're offering the support. Everything we can help them learn that has wider applications like body language is going to make them better fosters longer term. It also helps to create timelines to help identify patterns and or disruptions in routine. So, let's say it's this behavior showing up same time every day or every time people get home or around meal times. Or let's say the cat's acting bonkers one afternoon when it's usually pretty chill. Well, let's talk about was there anything different about your routine? Like, was the day normal? Did anything kind of was out of sync? And as you have these conversations with people, you might, excuse me, you might find out, oh, they usually play with the cat for like 20 minutes in the morning, but they were running late to a doctor appointment and weren't able to get that playtime in. And then they've had their whole day of work or whatever since then, and probably aren't going to make that connection right off the bat because a lot's happened since that morning. But there we have okay, well, that was out of the typical routine. It probably just the cat has some energy to burn. And it's a little less dramatic and stressful for people when they realize, oh, okay, I just need to go play with the cat. It's also important to remember that sensory input is, and the impacts it has is not only going to vary between species, which of course these animals can hear and smell a heck of a lot more than we can, but it's also going to impact individuals differently. And one of the things to keep in mind too is that there's a lot of noises in our modern homes that really fall to the background for most people. And for an animal who has never been in a home before, it can be alarming, and we may not really recognize that it's because something's making a noise that we're just used to. Maybe they're weirding out because the ceiling fan's going. Maybe it's the dishwasher. So when we ask our questions like, where did it happen? And somebody says, oh, it was in the kitchen, by the kitchen, that can lead us to questions like, oh, did you have any appliances running at the time? And maybe they didn't. Maybe they did, though. Maybe it was, and sometimes they'll go, oh, you know what? The dishwasher just started running when this happened. A lot of people will then start making connections themselves. It's also important to remember that their animals have different values for people, animals, things, and that can lead to behavior variation. My dog absolutely loves my mom. They're besties. I love it. My mom used to be terrified of dogs, so it's like means so much to me that they're besties. But my dog's relationship with my mom is very different from her relationship with me. She was a dog who had a lot of defense and fear and fight history when I got her. And so when I got her, it was a lot of we need to work on commands and building trust and making sure that you can trust me to handle a situation, essentially. And she does. If I'm outside talking to a neighbor, she might do a little bark. If my mom's outside talking to a neighbor, she's much more barkative. She barks much more talkative. And it's not because she likes my mom more, it's because she doesn't have that same level of trust in my mom's ability to handle a potential threat. So it's not always just about the value of a person. It's not always about, oh, you like that person, but you're scared of that person. They may like everybody involved, but that still can cause behavior variation because of the differences in relationship. Behavior does not exist in a bubble. It just doesn't. And that makes it all the more complicated and nuanced. So sometimes we have to look at the behavior, the actions, the body language of other people and or animals that aren't directly involved with the animal exhibiting the behavior of concern. So this might be the resident cats had a little spat across the room, and that stressed the foster animal out. And now the foster animal's hiding all night. And I was like, what is going on? Sometimes it's because the other cats are making noise or the other dogs are making noise. And I was just like, I don't want to be anywhere near this. Or it's family game night and something really exciting happens during the game. Everybody starts screaming and cheering and, and the foster animal is like, nope, I'm out. And they're like, the foster animal hid all night and still kind of hiding a lot this morning. It's like, okay, what happened last night? Did you do anything? Was there anything exciting going on? And hopefully we can find out, oh, there was a family game tonight. Okay, so they just need some reassurance and decompression. Additional ambient environmental factors. This can look like kids running around in the backyard. The dog or cat might be inside, but a bunch of activity, visual noise outside. Or neighbors having a barbecue. Or maybe a behavior keeps cropping up every day around 5, 6 o'clock when everybody's coming home and you've got doors opening and closing, garages opening and closing, things like that that are part of just our daily routines that don't always stick out to us. So when we talk about the analysis, the putting the puzzle together, we've gathered all this data. Great, now what do we do? And largely our goals are going to be contextualizing the behavior. 99.9% of the time, there is context. It may seem like a behavioral reaction is kind of excessive from our point of view, but it may be just that animal's experience. Again, I've worked with dogs who have like absolutely lost it because of a ceiling fan, not even allowed one, because it just, they've never been exposed to something like that before. There's like something is moving over my head. What is happening? And you look at the dog's history and it's like they've never looked alone before. It's like, okay, I can, from your perspective, see why that might be terrifying. Again, looking for both patterns and disruptions. We also want to avoid broad labels and conclusions without the comparative data to back it up. And the emphasis here is on comparative, because if you have somebody come to you and say, my foster animal is terrified of men. I've had 3 guy friends come over, terrified every time, but they've not had any other guests, or all 3 of those guys were big, or they all had hats on, or something like that, where there's other factors maybe. If we have nothing to compare that data to, we want to avoid saying, oh, this animal doesn't like men. Because it could be more about their stature. It could be about their voice. It could be about if they're more animated people or calmer people, or they're wearing hats. So this is where that descriptive note taking is really helpful too, to avoid those, slapping a broad label on that could potentially limit an animal unnecessarily for placement. Most likely wise, and this is our door to the education and mediation piece. And again, this is beyond you stuck your hand in the food bowl while the dog was eating. Your 4-month-old puppy is acting like a 4-month-old puppy. So beyond those, natural behavior and communication. A lot of times it is about an error in translation or interpretation on the human's part, where they're just misreading body language. They're not as savvy as they maybe think they are. Like, oh, I grew up with animals. They may not be savvy as they think they are, or the animal's trying to express a instinctual need, like hunting, scratching, digging, chewing, whatever, where it's part of being an animal. And it's not that they are trying to be a pain. They're just trying to meet that need that they have. Also, insufficient and ineffective communication from us humans is another common thing. If somebody says, my foster dog is chewing on the road every day while we're gone, we're constantly redirecting the dog when we're home, but they still chew it when we're not home. Well, they have the opportunity to chew it. And that automatically means that if they have access to that when somebody isn't around to redirect them, that automatically means it's not effective communication because we're not being consistent. Fear, anxiety, stress, and frustration is another very, very common root for a lot of behavioral concerns. As the saying goes, they may be having a hard time rather than giving you a hard time. If you're not familiar with the FASF acronym, it's from Fear Free Happy Homes, which is linked up the resources at the end of this presentation. We want to make sure we're considering the animal's perspective, both from an emotional and literal point of view. Again, a lot of these animals that come into our care are coming into our care with no prior home experience or very limited prior home experience. They're also really short compared to us. And I say this as somebody who's 5 foot. Their visual experience is a literal different level than ours. And so if you've got an animal who is constantly growling when they're between the coffee table and the couch, and like you're like, just jump on the couch and get out of there. That may not be their perspective. Their perspective may be like, I am trapped. I'm closed in on all sides. So keep in mind that literal point of view as well. Lack of predictability is a huge one. And the who, the what, the when, the where. And pretty much all these animals are facing that as soon as they go into a new environment. Now, they'll handle it differently. Some handle it better than others. But when we see a lot of behavior concerns in that first few days, that first few weeks, sometimes it's about the animal just doesn't have that routine down yet. They're just figuring this out still, and everything is still so uncertain and so unpredictable to them. And that alone is going to be stressful if you don't know what to expect next, if you don't have that assurance and that confidence that, like, I will eat every day, I have a safe place to sleep every day, and that doesn't change overnight. Also, the loss of agency. So the loss of the ability to just protect themselves, essentially, or feel like they can protect themselves and make their own choices. We see this a lot with dogs on leash. And this is obviously not the only reason a dog may react on leash, but it is a reason that dogs can react on leash, is that even a social dog may suddenly feel like I have no options available to me if something were to happen, and therefore I need to make everybody else stay away from me. Now, it's probably not that articulate in their brains, but along those lines of logic, I'm just going to protect myself by scaring everybody off before something bad happens. And that's because they don't know necessarily that they can trust their person to get them out of a stressful situation, or that they have the ability to walk away and the person be like, oh, you're uncomfortable, we can go. So we also see that with barriers, when there's, excuse me, a door, a gate, fence, window, whatever. And just, again, being in a new environment, they may not know all the exit routes available to them. They may not know where in the home is safe that they can escape to when they're overwhelmed. Overstimulation, you may also be familiar with the term overarousal, another very, very common factor in a lot of behavior concerns that come up. And this overstimulation or overarousal can have a lot of different roots. It can be excitement. Oh my God, I'm so excited. I don't know what to do with myself, right? It can be an experience, whether in the sense of novelty or the sense, where it's just like, oh my God, there's all this new stuff. I don't know what to do with myself. Like the kid going to Disney World for the first time, where they're just like vibrating because it's so exciting and overwhelming. Or the uncertainty, like that microwave beeping. Trigger stacking, where you have a lot of quote unquote smaller stressors that are building one on top of the other. And it's hard to see that sometimes when you're in the moment and you're not looking for it. A great example of this is if you are walking a dog and on your walk, there's been some other dogs, they maybe barked a little bit, maybe the dog surprised you from around a corner. If your foster dog's really holding it together well, you're about to get home, and then they see another dog across the street minding its own business and start barking and pulling and just losing it. And it's not about that dog across the street. It's about every other dog in stressful moment before that has brought the dog to the limit and being like, I am done. I'm over it. Cannot handle this anymore. My cup is full. And this can also happen with things like events. Are we looking at, why is my dog being weird today? And you look and you find out, oh, they went to the clinic yesterday. They may still be emotionally recovering from that clinic visit. Or, something else that happens that has just stressed the dog out, fireworks, storms, all that stuff. That when that stress spikes, it does not immediately flip off when that event is done. And depending on how stressed the animal is and how many other stressors are piling on, it can sometimes take a couple days of just rest and relaxation and being left alone to decompress before they're bouncing back. And of course, health. There is such a close interconnection between health and behavior. And especially as you are doing the detective work and you are just like, nothing is showing up that really screams, oh, this is probably why. Makes sense why the animal is reacting because of X, Y, Z that I have discovered in these conversations. So especially when we get to those points, that's when we might need to start looking at the health of the animal. If you are not familiar with the Mills paper from 2020, this is linked, so if you want to go look at it, you're welcome to. I encourage you to at least read the analysis and the conclusion. The short of it is that this paper, the people who did this paper, they found in looking at dogs who were showing some kind of aggression and no obvious signs of injury or illness. So they're not limping, they're not bleeding, they're not like snotty faced or anything like that. Between 20 and 80% of them were then later discovered to have an underlying health concern. That when that was addressed, it either resolved the behavior, the aggression, or reduced it significantly. And so on the low end of that, we're talking about 1 out of every 5 dogs that had aggression with no obvious ailments, something physically was wrong. And especially when we look at our populations that are coming in from rural areas off the streets, that they have been in survival mode, and it makes sense why they are not limping when they're hurting, because that puts them in danger as far as their brains are concerned. And there's a lot of things that are going on that aren't going to show on the surface. So gut issues, skin issues. In that paper, they found the leading one pretty much across the board was osteo issues, so your joints, things like that. Probably not a surprise. But GI issues and allergies were also very high on the list of underlying medical causes that they were contributing to this aggressive behavior. So it may not seem like, oh, pain, but it's still discomfort. And if you've ever had a stomach flu that's lasted for days, or you've ever had a really bad rash that's lasted for days, probably has lowered your tolerance for other stress. And that's if you're treating it, if you're on the medication to resolve it. And with the awareness that you're on medication to resolve it. Whereas these animals don't necessarily have that awareness that, oh, I'm on this medication to fix the problem. I can chill. I can hold it together. They don't know. They're just experiencing this discomfort for a very long period of time. Their tolerance for other stuff is going to go down. And when we look at illness, we especially want to consider any that have required significant and or prolonged treatments, hospitalization, isolation, especially in our younger population, like our parvo puppies, but even with adults. And I've seen this go a couple ways. I've seen my dog who is recovering or just finished treatment for something really intense is very grumpy, right? And is cranky and is aggressive or whatever. So the resident dogs, it's like you find out they just got released from the parvo ward. They're probably still recovering. They're just not contagious anymore. So they need maybe more boundaries and maybe less social time to just decompress. And the other one is my perfect, wonderful foster animal is suddenly being a menace. And it's because they're now feeling better and they have the energy to show their true personality. And that's the trickier conversation because you have to explain, like, it's kind of a good thing that you're seeing this now because it means they're feeling better. Let's address it. But it actually kind of is a good thing. Very awkward conversation to have. I'll tell you that by the time I left APA on the behavior follow-up team, I was just in the habit of every time I pulled up a dog's file to look at their notes, I was pulling up their medical file too to see if they were on any recent medications, to see if they had any recent treatments or surgeries, just so before I even go into that conversation with the person, I'm checking that file and seeing, oh, they just got neutered 2 days ago. That might be playing into why they're seeing grumpy behavior. And then, of course, sensory loss and cognitive decline, things like that, especially with our older populations. Keeping that in mind. If the same behavior is cropping up around 6, 7 o'clock every evening, and you go, wait a second, that's when the sun starts going down. Maybe there's some kind of vision or cognitive thing because maybe it's that period before they turn all the lights on because it's too dark for the people now. But the animal who may be experiencing vision loss is having a much harder time seeing in that dimmer lighting. Or there's a cognitive decline or something else like that. And obviously the specifics is something you want to talk really closely with your clinic and medical teams about. But keeping in mind that interplay is very prevalent. So how do we address it? How do we teach people? How do we help them resolve the concerns. And the how is often applicable to animals and humans because the people are stressed too, a lot of times. By the time they get to this point where you're having to do the detective work, they're usually stressed as well and frustrated and don't know what's going on or how to address it. So it's not our job to be their therapist, but sometimes we can encourage, like, it's okay if you need to take a break from your foster animal. Give them a Kong, go play a game or something. You don't have to feel bad about that. Consistency is everybody's least favorite one because it is the one that is just about time. It is just about keeping things consistent for long enough for the animals to figure it out. Which again tends to be people's least favorite because they want quick fixes. Unfortunately, there's not really quick fixes. Boundaries and restrictions, this is not always in the sense of like punishment. It just may be, take that example of the dog who keeps getting into the remote while people are gone. Maybe we need to limit how much space that dog can roam around so that they're not getting into things they shouldn't when nobody's there to redirect them and get them on something, chew this instead. Um, I've had people ask me like, new fosters, like, should I let my foster dog on the furniture? And assuming there's no behavioral issues, obviously, that we know about the dog and furniture, I'm like, that is up to you. And I will tell you this, if you're not sure, it's better to teach them to not go on the furniture now, because later on, if you decide, no, they can go on the furniture, the worst thing is they just don't go on the furniture. Versus if you give them too much access and later decide, I actually don't want the animal on the furniture, it's harder to teach, not impossible, it's harder to teach that dog you're no longer allowed on the furniture. So boundaries and restrictions of these kinds can be very much beneficial for that long-term success. Relationship building may seem obvious, but this isn't just when it comes to our scaredies. This is applicable for all these animals to build that relationship. When they have that stability, they can rely on their caregiver. That's going to help across the board. It's going to reduce stress and anxiety and fear. It's going to help them feel more comfortable in their environment. And I've had a lot of people say to me, I'm so worried that my foster dog is too attached to me. And that's going to be harder for them to go into a home after this. And the truth is that will it be hard? Yeah, probably usually is. But by having this experience of bonding with a person, especially if an animal may have never had that experience before, it's going to teach them that they can trust people, they can form these bonds, and they can have these safe environments where they don't have to worry about every little thing. And that this bigger dog's got it handled. Sometimes we have to modify the environment, and this can be putting up gates, this can be moving furniture. We look at that dog who gets grumpy when they're putting themselves between the coffee table and the couch. Sometimes the easiest thing to do is just while that dog's in the home, we're pushing that coffee table away from the couch so they can't even get stuck there. Not going to rehearse that. And then, of course, modifying human behavior. We have to make sure we're approaching the animal to meet their needs. Everybody wants to go to every animal and go, you're so cute, baby animal. I love you so much. And, you've got those scaredies who are completely freaked out and be like, I don't want anything to do with you, right? We have to modify our energy and our interactions to meet that animal's emotional response, their interpretation to our intent. And we have to then teach that to our fosters sometimes that have the biggest hearts and the best intentions in the world, and realizing like some animals aren't going to want that physical contact for comfort right away. And that can be really hard for some people to understand, but it's such an important message to communicate with the fosters who may be struggling with that idea. Enrichments, Kongs, puzzle toys, hunting toys for cats, playtime. Enrichments isn't really going to just knock anything out of the park just by itself, but it can help for so many different things. It can help with boredom, anxiety, meeting those natural instinctual needs like chewing and scratching. Never underestimate the power of enrichments. And there's so many creative enrichments out there. There's like whole Facebook groups dedicated to creative enrichment approaches. And understanding too that cats often need enrichment too, not just dogs, because that cat that's bouncing off the wall is probably bored. My cat needs enrichment because she has anxiety. She has chronic anxiety. And so she eats out of puzzle toys because it helps her be a little less anxious. And of course, our health checks, potential medications, depending on the extent of the behavior concern and what's going on, this may include behavioral medications. And again, that's a conversation you have with your vet, your medical teams. But if an animal is so just high strung that we can't get through to them with these more like adjusting routines, adjusting environment, and giving them space or whatever, they're not even engaging with us to play. That may be a conversation for behavioral meds, because if they're just constantly at 100 and they're never coming down from that, then they're going to stay up there. And what behavior meds can do is can help cap that, where it's not going to necessarily eliminate their anxiety completely, but it can help lower it so that they're then able to process their surroundings, what's going on with the other people and animals, and realize, oh, it's not the end of the world. Community connections and support, I think, is something that is, I think a lot of people think they have that going, but there's so many creative ways we can build on that. And one of those ways is connecting fosters with each other, facilitating that connection with their peers, purely from a morale standpoint, to, realize you're not going through these struggles alone. Oh, you've had this challenge too, and it's worked out. And just having that emotional support is really important. But there's also practical applications to connecting fosters with each other. If you've got a foster who's got a dog social dog and that foster works from home, and you got another foster with a dog social dog, and that person works 9 to 5, and that dog's struggling with being left home alone, maybe they live close enough and you can have staff facilitate an intro between the dogs. And if that works out, maybe the stay-at-home foster can watch that other foster dog while that person's at work. Also looking at parts of the community that maybe aren't able to foster full-time, but can help in other ways, like your volunteers. Hey, we have a foster dog who needs an outing in the middle of the day, or a foster cat that needs a medication in the middle of the day. Tap your volunteers, see if anybody lives close who'd be able to connect with the foster to keep that animal in the home. If you've got colleges, appeal to the college kids who cannot have pets in their dorms. That may look like, hey, do you want to sign up to hang out with animals in the home during the day? Do you want to sign up to be a sitter if a foster needs to go out of town? If I had those opportunities in college, I would have been all over that. So keep that in mind, that just because somebody or a group of demographic can't foster full time doesn't mean they cannot support the foster program and the fosters who can foster full time. Yes, this is a pun. So fostering communication, and this is just kind of tips for the education piece. Collaborate. It should be a conversation with your fosters, not a lecture. Yes, there will be times where we just have to sit down and tell people what to do nicely, kindly, compassionately, but sometimes we have to be a little more direct. However, we want to try to not make it feel like that. They're going to be much more engaged. They're going to feel better about they are being heard. They're going to feel like we're not just writing them off. They're going to feel like we're actually engaging with them and their struggles. And that means they're going to be more likely to effectively implement whatever recommendations we do give them, if they feel like they are part of the process. Now, there are occasionally going to be some fosters who just tell me what to do. And sometimes they're just like that. But for the most part, people want to be involved. I think that's why they're doing this, right? That's why they're fostering. They want to be involved. Brainstorm. Give fosters opportunities to participate and have their own agency in the process when it makes sense. If you're like, okay, well, I think your foster cat needs some more exercise or enrichment. Here are some suggestions off the top of my head. Do any of these work? Do they not fit into your schedule for some reason? What might fit into your schedule? Again, make it a dialogue, make it a back and forth so that they feel like they have some control over the situation, because sometimes that's what they need, just like animals. Humanize yourself. We're not perfect. And while we are presenting ourselves to some extent as experts, we want to avoid that we're so superior, kind of even accidentally just being too knowledgeable. And what I mean by that is never admitting that you don't know something. It's really important to be comfortable saying, I don't know, to know where your gaps in knowledge and experience are. And then say you don't know, and say, I'm going to go find out. And yeah, that particular conversation may end with a frustrated foster, but 9 times out of 10, I guarantee you, once you come back with I figured this out, I've talked to people, I've looked it up, I've done my research, here's what we can try. Most of those people are going to be so grateful that you went through that effort and you weren't just BSing them, minimizing the issue or anything like that. You took it seriously, you put in an effort. I've had fosters who, I just like, they're frustrated, I get it, I'm not gonna push back on that. And then when I followed up with them, who have apologized to me, unprompted, just because they're like, I realized I was really upset and I'm so appreciative. So, and if they don't, they don't. But most of the time, the long-term benefit is in admitting you don't know something and then go finding it out and putting the effort in. Because that's going to be so meaningful to these people. So when we talk about the mediation piece, I like to look at this as the foster lens. And here's the spoiler for this whole presentation, is that all of this work we do to try to understand and have compassion for the dog's point of view applies to the people. And while it is not on us to go dig into these people's lives, find out, we're not grilling them, we're not interviewing them about their lives, what information they provide can be helpful. It's not appropriate, quite frankly, to grill them about their own lives when, oh, I think this person might have trauma, right? Like, we're not doing that. But there is merit in every point of view. And some of you are probably going, no, there's not. But there is. And that's because an individual's emotional response to a stressful situation is always valid, just like an animal's. And by valid, I mean like it's valid in taking the time to understand there may be a reason that may not be our reason, may not be how we react, may not be how our pets react, but something in that individual's brain is saying, react to the stressor, react to the stimulus, because people also experience flight, fight, freeze, and fawn. We experience those behaviors too. We also, again, we're not going to know everybody's history, just like we don't know these animals' histories. But personal experiences and past trauma can lead to unexpected triggers and affect perception. And that's, again, why it's helpful to try to gather as much objective detail about like descriptions of what an animal is doing rather than just those adjectives of like aggressive, scared, right? Because that can help clear the lens a little bit when we're trying to analyze. It's never going to be perfect, but you can have somebody who has grown up with dogs, had dogs all their adult life, know that dogs sometimes growl. And then one day they're walking by the dog park and a really gnarly fight breaks out. And the next time a dog growls in their home, their nervous system triggers. And suddenly they're reacting to that situation that they've been in a million times in a new way. And they're not always going to be aware of that connection. So always have that same compassion for the people that we extend to the animals. And I hate to say it, but a foster's life is not going to revolve around the animal and their care, and neither will an adopter's. And so when we're trying to address concerns, when we're trying to mediate solutions and figure out what's going to work for everybody, we have to keep in mind that this is not their whole life. It's our whole life because we have no boundaries and we're doing this 24/7. It's not their whole life. They have families, they have resident pets, they have jobs, all sorts of other commitments. And we have to remember that most people who are going to be interested in adopting also are not going to revolve their entire lives around these animals. And so we have to find what's reasonable and have reasonable expectations for people that have entire other lives and respect that sometimes that unfortunately means the foster situation doesn't work out. But if we respect that, they may be able to foster somebody when their life circumstances changes. Versus if we kind of just stress them out by pressuring them into keeping an animal, they may not be so keen on fostering in the future when they're more able to. Again, assume good intentions. These people are coming forward to foster because they have big hearts. Mistakes happen. We've made them. If you've been in this industry more than 5 minutes and say you've never made a mistake in caring for an animal, I'm not going to believe you because we've all been there, and it can be a minor mistake, but we've all been there. And we are exposed to animals far more frequently and intensively than the fosters are. So keep in mind mistakes happen. Also remember that misinformation and outdated understandings of animal behavior are still widespread in the general public. It's not their fault. People still talk about dominance theory like it's a thing that wasn't debunked a few years after that first paper came out. It is unfortunate. I still have people referencing Caesar Milan and dog whisper and all that stuff. And it's frustrating. And yeah, I definitely want to bang my head against the wall every time they mention the dog whisperer. But it's not their fault that they don't know better until they are taught better. because that is the pop culture around a lot of dog behavior still and animal behavior in general. So yes, it's frustrating, and yes, you can go to your coworker and be like, oh my God, they didn't mention season one. But when you're talking to the foster, approach with that understanding that they just have not come across an opportunity to learn better. So here's the opportunity. Let's make it worthwhile. Guilt, fear, stress, all that stuff can impact decision making, both in how a situation is handled or in relaying information. So it's not always conscious either. Are there times where fosters will actively think, I don't want to say this because I think it's going to get me or the dog or the cat in trouble? Yes. We shouldn't assume that though, because there's also times where the subconscious makes that decision for us. And then a week later, they're like, I just remembered this thing. Got to be gracious about that they came to us with that extra information that maybe blows the whole thing wide open. Now we have a way clearer understanding of what's been going on. But again, they have these stress responses just like the animals do, and that absolutely impacts how they handle the situation. And again, they're living with the animal. So something that may seem minor to us, when they're living with that animal, can seem a lot more intense. Also, can't believe I forgot to put it on this, but also remember people have cultural differences. So there are going to be, and even just within the US, but certainly if you're working with fosters who are immigrants or diaspora, who have come from vastly different cultures that have vastly different kind of just relationships with cats and dogs, that is going to affect what they know and how they react to situations too. And humans need positive reinforcement too, just like our animals. And even in the most frustrating situations where it's like they made every single mistake they could possibly make, and this situation got blown way out, just way worse than it needed to be, we can always thank them for coming to us for support. We can always tell them, I'm so glad you reached out. I'm sorry you're going through this, but let's help you figure this out. And that goes for the potty training issues as much as it goes for the aggression issues. Because again, looking long term, if people feel like they're not a burden for asking for help, even on a minor issue, they're going to be more willing and more readily reach out when it's a bigger issue. And we don't want them waiting on the bigger issues. I don't want them waiting on any issues, but especially the bigger issues that could escalate and get worse quickly. So always show your appreciation and give them that positive reinforcement there in that moment of thank you for reaching out. These people know we're busy. Even when they're frustrated and they make comments, they know we're busy. Intellectually, they're aware. And a lot of people don't want to be burdens and don't want to, take our time away from the animals in the shelter or whatever. And that's just because, again, they are coming to us with good hearts, good intentions. So we just need to make sure we're showing them we actually would prefer you reach out to us. Yeah, it takes time, but that's what effective behavior, that's what effective foster behavior support looks like, is it does take time. Some resources that are just generally really good resources. Again, Fear Free Happy Homes has some great handouts. They also have a couple good videos on like dog and cat body language 101 that I don't know how many times I sent out that body language 101 video to people because it's really good 5-minute video. Every Dog Behavior and Training is a nonprofit training facility in Austin, and they have a huge library of webinars, presentations, things like that. Not necessarily to like send to the foster, but if you're looking for those answers or you're just looking to expand your own knowledge, really, really great resources that are just completely free in their library. Lily Chen, you probably have seen the Boogie the Boston dog behavior infographic. She's got a bunch of other really great infographics that are just free to download and print and distribute. And then I also want to highlight this Facebook group for feral, former stray, and shy dog resources, whether you just happen to have one of these types of dogs in your facility, or maybe you're in a rural organization that takes a lot of these dogs in. It is a very wonderful group. The woman who runs it, Sarah Lyons, has actually been with APA longer than I was. She is very savvy when it comes to these types of dogs, and she is a very excellent communicator. And we trust her implicitly not to BS people. Like we would basically hook her up with people who took in these kinds of dogs at APA and be like, hey, can you help them? And so she has this group on Facebook that she runs. And again, it's also a great point of community where people can just understand they're not in it alone. It's worked out for others. There is hope. There is camaraderie. And of course, each other, whether that's your coworkers, your volunteers, peers at other organizations, the Maddie's Forum. I mean, so many organizations have, If you don't have them, a lot of organizations have your handouts on potty training, crate training, stuff like that, that are pretty straightforward, and just borrow them. And, don't claim it as your own, obviously, just borrow them. It's better than reinventing the wheel. And there's my email. And of course, I will be in the forum at least the next couple weeks as well.
Thank you so much, Zan. That was great and so helpful. Thank you to everybody watching today's webcast. This is the last Maddie's Monthly Foster Connection of 2025, so I hope everyone's holidays are wonderful and we will see you in the new year.